Marketplace like the Q.
Family, it's your favorite queer radio personality, Anna DeShawn, and this is Queer News, your favorite weekly news pod where race and sexuality meet politics, culture, and entertainment. First and foremost, I have to say thank you to everyone that took our first listenership survey. At the time of this recording, y'all, we have 62 respondents. That's really dope, and it feels like a solid, small, but solid sample size of our audience, okay? And I'll be drawing a winner for our $50 gift card today on Monday and sending an email out to the winner. So be on the lookout, okay? And I can't wait to really dig into the data. I asked a fair amount of questions, and so it's going to be really cool to review it with my team and to continue to improve this podcast while feeling like I'm actually giving y'all what y'all want to hear, you know? Not just what is in my gut or something I want to share with y'all. You feel me? So thank you. Thank you again. QCrew, we secured an exclusive interview for you too. This month it is Raquel Willis. Raquel is an award-winning activist, author, and media strategist dedicated to Black transgender liberation. Now, family, if y'all don't know Raquel, maybe you're under a rock. But let me just give you a quick rundown, all right? She was the first trans executive editor of Out Magazine. She founded Transgender Week of Visibility and Action. She currently serves as executive producer for iHeartMedia's Outspoken Podcast Network, which is their LGBTQ arm, all right? She's also a WNBA Social Justice Council member, and somehow in the midst of all the things she's done and continues to do, she found time to write a book. And not just any book, it's her memoir titled The Risk It Takes to Bloom on Life and Liberation. I got the opportunity to sit down with her and talk all about it. And well, QCrew, you get it first. So check your email I sent to your way. Family, you'll get it next week, okay? Now, our QCrew is our queer news community where you receive a weekly email sharing our top queer news stories, an unedited video from me about said stories and even just about my life. And now, first dibs on our exclusive interviews. The QCrew really does help to supplement the cost of this podcast hosting, editing, marketing, PR, travel, all of it. So if you believe in the work we do, if you believe LGBTQ stories need to be amplified, if you love and respect how I report on the news and tell our stories, join the QCrew. A link is in the show notes. Today is Dr. King's birthday and the day we celebrate his life and legacy. We'll do this on the podcast with our special edition titled Honoring Coretta While Remembering Martin. Before we get into the special, I do want to share a few top queer news headlines. My goal is to do videos for these as well to give more information over the next week or so. So make sure you're following me on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. Whatever your favorite, okay? Whatever's your favorite social, just go find me there, okay? At Anna DeShawn. Our first top queer news story is Amber Minor. Amber was a 40-year-old Black trans woman who was killed in Missouri on Christmas Eve. Hey, y'all heard that story? That's why we're here. Amber Minor, we speak your name today. In politics, Ohio's governor vetoed anti-trans legislation one day, which was a win, only to turn around the next week and sign an executive order banning gender transition surgeries for minors. It's all very confusing, but that all happened. Then a trans woman looking to run for office in Ohio was disqualified because she didn't disclose her dead name on the paperwork. In culture and entertainment, Mean Girls is out, and all the queers were at the premiere in Atlanta. This musical adaptation has queer main characters and doesn't shy away from them being exactly who they are, which I heard is really different than the original. I didn't watch the original. I don't know if I'm going to watch this one, but the queers is all about it. Okay, so I'm telling y'all about it. So if this is your thing, go see it. It is in theaters now. Family, it's that time for us to jump into our Dr. King special edition. I am on a personal mission to honor Coretta while remembering Martin, because today wouldn't even exist without her tireless labor and sacrifice for Black liberation. Anna's word today, because I always leave y'all with a word, is a quote from Coretta that you will hear in the episode, and you'll see it in our artwork. She says, "I've always felt that homophobic attitudes and policies were unjust and unworthy of a free society and must be opposed by all Americans who believe in democracy. The civil rights movement thrives on unity and inclusion, not division and exclusion." Family, I hope this message resonates with you. I hope you learned something new today. I hope you leave this episode inspired. And I truly, truly hope you enjoy it. Do something today. Do something this week. Do something this year that honors the legacy and life of Dr. King and of Coretta and the sacrifice that they made for Black liberation. Talk to you next week, okay? Peace.
Did you lose your health insurance coverage? At GetCoveredIllinois.gov, certified local navigators can help you find out if you qualify for a special enrollment period through the ACA Marketplace. Find out more at GetCoveredIllinois.gov. Your health coverage starts here.
Today is the day set aside to remember the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To this day, when I hear his voice and listen to his speeches, I get chills. Even more so now as an adult, as I have an even greater understanding of the enormous sacrifice that he made. It is with that sacrifice in mind that I wanted to drop this special edition titled Honoring Coretta While Remembering Martin. Throughout this episode, I'm going to talk about her life before Martin, with Martin, and after Martin. I will share audio clips of Mrs. King herself because we just simply don't hear her voice enough. She was her own woman, and I contend his legacy wouldn't be what it is today without her being who she always was, a fierce, unstoppable force. Family, we know Dr. King was a scholar, a preacher, and a good troublemaker. His beliefs have been watered down to a few select moments in time, but to study the arc of his work is to know that he was challenging far more than Jim Crow. He stood in opposition to war. He stood in opposition to capitalism. Do you? If Dr. King was alive today, would you really support him? Well, the arc and the expansiveness of his beliefs did not occur by happenstance. Mrs. King was one of the only civil rights leaders of our time who truly believed in radical inclusiveness. Her belief system didn't form after she met Martin. She was clear long before then that the world needed to change. Born in Marion, Alabama, her parents were entrepreneurs who disrupted the status quo of what white folks thought their place was supposed to be in the world. Because of this, as a teenager, her family home and their sawmill business was burned to the ground by white supremacists. She was very keenly aware of the vile hate that existed in the world and wanted to be part of the change. While studying music at Antioch College, she became politically active with the NAACP, Civil Liberties Committees, and various peace movements. Dr. King wrote this in his autobiography. She talked about things other than music. I will never forget. The first discussion we had was about the question of racial and economic injustice and the question of peace. She had been actively engaged in movements dealing with these problems. After an hour, my mind was made up. I said, "So you can do something else besides sing? You've got a good mind also. You have everything I ever wanted in a woman. We ought to get married someday." I didn't want a wife I couldn't communicate with. I had to have a wife who would be as dedicated as I was. I wish I could say I led her down this path, but I must say we went down it together because she was as actively involved and concerned when we met as she is now. Bayard Rustin, who was the architect of so much of the work, was friends with Mrs. King before he ever met Dr. King. She brought him into their lives, and we can be sure that much of what we know today as the civil rights movement wouldn't have been what it was without Bayard. Now, no matter how many of the preachers didn't want him around there because he was gay, Mrs. King had the ear of the one person who could truly make the final decision, and Bayard wasn't going anywhere. Her radical inclusiveness was unheard of in the circle she kept, and even with her own family. She was focused on getting Black folks to examine their homophobia. She would call out Black pastors and hold them accountable. I quote, Freedom and injustice cannot be parceled out in pieces to suit political convenience. I don't believe you can stand for freedom for one group of people and deny it to others. Amen. Now, take a listen to a couple of other speeches she gave on this very subject.
I've always felt that homophobic attitudes and policies were unjust and unworthy of a free society and must be opposed by all Americans who believe in democracy. I still hear people say that I should not be talking about the rights of lesbian and gay people, and I should stick to the issue of racial justice. But I hasten to remind them that Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
Do y'all see what I mean? For history will lead you to believe that Mrs. King was just sitting at home, raising their 4 children, and being a quiet, dutiful Christian wife. Now, raising their 4 children, yes, and they were her top priority, but she was far from quiet and dutiful. It's said that she actually crossed out obey from their marriage vows because she wasn't having it. She never stopped singing and began hosting freedom concerts to raise money for the movement. She would sing classical songs, traditional songs, and speak to the world she would help create. Take a listen to Mrs. King sing. She had a beautiful voice and was on the road to being a mezzo-soprano phenomenon until she met Martin. I will say, she was very clear that her place was beside her husband and not behind. Oftentimes when Dr. King couldn't make an engagement, he would call on Mrs. King to speak in his place. When they marched together, she was never behind him, was she? She was right there putting her life on the line right next to him. And we know on April 4th, his life was taken. And it quite literally shook the world. It's a moment where anyone who was alive could tell you exactly where they were when they heard the news. They can tell you how they felt. Well, today, we know even more of the story. We know the day before he was exhausted. He'd been traveling, marching, meeting, receiving countless death threats, and didn't want to give that now infamous speech in Memphis. Y'all know the one. Let me play it for you.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Allow the chills to just roll off my arms for a second. He could feel death was near. Well, did you know that a couple of days after his assassination, Mrs. King decided to go to Memphis? Before Dr. King's services, she decided in the midst of her grief to stand in for her husband as she'd done so many times before and lead the sanitation workers' silent march. It's documented that 42,000 people attended, and hear what she had to say.
I came because whenever it was impossible for my husband to be in a place where he wanted to be and felt that he needed to be, he would occasionally send me to stand in for him. And so today I felt that he would have wanted me to be here.
It wasn't a month later that she attended the Central Park Peace Rally. They weren't expecting her to speak, but when she did, this is what she said. The work of peacemaking must continue until the last gun is silent. I come to you in my grief only because you keep alive the work and dreams for which my husband gave his life. My husband derived so much of his strength and inspiration from the love of people who shared his dream, that I too now come hoping you might strengthen me for the lonely road ahead. Now, here are two excerpts from Mrs. King. First, a speech she gave at Harvard in 1968, just months after Dr. King's assassination and shortly after Robert Kennedy's. Following that excerpt is another from the Solidarity Day rally in 1968, where she talks about the various types of violence and how they show up in the world.
It is a reflection of the violence our media celebrate. It is, I say, with all due respect to the office of the President of the United States, that even intense prayer and a new commission of notables will not ease the violence in our lives. Though acting forthrightly on the recommendations of the Kerner Commission report might help. This is no time for business as usual, and strengthening the police is business as usual. I remind you that starving a child is violence, suppressing a culture is violence, neglecting school children is violence, punishing a mother and her child is violence, discrimination against a working man is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical needs is violence. Contempt for poverty is violence. Even the lack of willpower to help humanity is a sick and sinister form of violence.
You heard what she said about the police, right? Okay, just making sure. I decided to honor Coretta while remembering Martin because she carried his legacy on her shoulders for the rest of her life. For 38 years, she spoke, she traveled, she was criticized for not taking stronger political stances. She made this day possible to ensure that her husband's legacy would not die. She made sure there was a King Center to ensure she was able to tell the story and educate others. Just as Dr. King was called to this work, so was Coretta. History has put her in boxes that keep her narrative somewhere behind Martin's, but no, not here, not today. She is not just the wife of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She is the movement. Thank you, Mrs. King, for your sacrifice, for your radical inclusiveness, for seeing, loving, and embracing people just like me. If you enjoyed what you heard, rate and review us inside your favorite podcasting app. This podcast is written and produced by me, Anna DeShawn, and brought to you by E3 Radio, your #1 queer radio station playing queer music and reporting on queer news in high rotation.